The Sports Scouting Report with Lieber King, brought to you by Harvey Autos in Shreveport, Bossier City, the name you've trusted for years. Geico, the insurance savings you expect. Supreme Chevrolet, expect more from Supreme Automotive Group in Gonzales.
Creed and Creed Law Firm, serious attorneys for serious injuries.
Bollinger Shipyards, 75 years of delivering high-quality vessels. Here's your host, Lieber King.
Listen, whatever you're driving right now, Tommy Harvey wants it. Bring it in to Harvey Subaru, Lexus of Shreveport, Bossier City, or John Harvey Toyota. They're paying big bucks for all trades right now. They'll cut you a check right there. Tell them Lee sent you.
JT Curtis, John Curtis Christian School.
Coach, thank you for allowing me to be here today at your school. I mean, it's been a great day, 5 hours. Jeff has allowed me to interview a lot of your student athletes, girls and boys, and unbelievable. I'm super impressed today, Coach.
Well, they're good kids, and really there's a lot of good kids, and what I believe and what I learned through the years is that regardless of the generation, they all really want the same thing, Lee. They want to know you, that you love them and you care about them. They want to be instructed. They want to learn, and they want discipline. They bucket, but they really want it. And I think when you supply those three things to them, that they can grow as young people. They can grow into productive citizens, and deep down, I know they appreciate it, even though if they don't know it sometimes.
Yeah, I tell you, man, since 1969, Coach, I look back at that year that you started as head coach here, and I look at what's changed over the years, in Louisiana with football.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Louis Cook the other day at Notre Dame, and it's like, how many guys are left from the early 70s? There's not many guys left.
No, there's not. There's not a lot of us left. We lost Rusty Price just a few weeks ago, and those kind of guys. Charlie Baglio, another icon.
Great guy.
That has been a big influence, and so that's hard to see those kind of people get out of the profession because they've meant so much to just not their players, but their influence to the coaches that have worked with him and under him.
I was telling somebody the other day, Coach, I was having lunch with some friends in Baton Rouge, and the average age was 50 to about 80. And these are guys that follow sports all over. And I said, in the 60s, we were talking about high school coaches who said, well, Charlie McLendon was the coach at LSU till 1980, 79, 80. Wow. And you look at all the coaches that were then, and I'm like, well, JT Curtis was at John Curtis in 69.
That's it.
And I wanted to get your thoughts. What was football like to you when Charlie McLendon was at LSU and the Tulane days in 69 and 70 and those? I was born in 70. What was those days like for you in the beginning, Coach, dealing with those colleges compared to today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was so naive. I thought that I had all the answers and that we would throw the ball out there and we'd win the game. And of course, in 69, we didn't win one. And I realized that at that point that there was a process to this. And the process had to be completed. It had to be not just football. It had to be your off-season program, your conditioning program, your lifting program. And that the emphasis needed to be in the right priority, the right order, and that is academically, to make sure that these guys understood that this was the most important part of their life. And then the athletic became the secondary phase of that. But from our perspective, it was also trying to develop young men and women from a Christian perspective. So those things have never changed and will continue to be. I think the difference has been that recruiting has become so much more national. But Coach McLendon and his group focused Louisiana 90%. and maybe a little bit in Mississippi, a little bit in Texas, but they played with homegrown people, and those people were committed to LSU. Coach McLendon was such a fundamentalist. I remember the big criticism was that he was too conservative. Well, conservative to win a bunch of football games, I can tell you that, when a lot of people couldn't. And I think that in the 80s we begin to see some expansion. I think part of that was, believe it or not, the influence of airline tickets. All of a sudden it was easy to get tickets to other parts of the country, of the Southeast, pretty reasonably, and players could go to different parts of the country and play, and their parents could still be a part of it, especially in the Southeast area, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, some in the Georgia area. That opened it up, and recruiting really became more widespread in that era.
And speaking of the 80s, Coach, then came Jerry Stovall, and me and you both agree that one of the greatest Louisiana recruiters that no one really gave that kind of compliment to publicly. I don't think anybody's, Saban was great at it, and you've seen all the guys come through your office, but, Stovall signed Leonard Marshall, Ramsey Dardar, all these great Louisiana players. He didn't let anybody leave the state.
No, first of all, I think when you visited with Jerry, it didn't take you very long to recognize the enthusiasm of his personality, number one. But right behind that was the genuineness. He was sold on LSU and what LSU could bring into the lives of these young people that he was recruiting. And he was able to convince the parents of kids that were being recruited nationally that this was still the best place for their children to be, not only in the next 4 years or 5 years, but in their future. And as a result, he was able to keep so many great players from our state in his 3-year tenure at LSU. And as I told you, I thought he was one of the coaches that gets way too little credit for what he was able to bring to LSU, the kind of coaching staff that he assembled at LSU, and then the consistency of the great players that the next 3 years after his tenure became very obvious, the kind of players they were.
Coach, I agree with you. If they'd have gave him that 83 season, if they would have gave him the 84 season to come back, he could have been a 20-year coach at LSU. I still thought he should have won the Heisman Trophy over Terry Baker.
Yeah.
I say that so if Jerry's family listens, or Jerry.
Well, and I'm going to tell you, Jerry would be the only one that would not even talk about that.
West Monroe's most famous player.
Yep, no question. And a lot of people don't realize he was second in that Heisman Trophy race.
Heck of a
he was
player.
As prestigious as that award is, he was a better person than that award could have ever accomplished in his life.
Coach, reminiscing, speaking of the old days, me and you were reminiscing about the true high school AllStar Games that were held in Tiger Stadium and in Cajun Field, USL, that you coached many young men that are adults today doing whatever they're doing. But wherever I go in state, I'll talk to a lineman or Eddie Fuller, running back, or whoever, and they go, well, I remember when JT coached me or Louis Cook coached me, and that's when all the top players would play in the game, and nobody was early enrolling. Everybody could play in the All-Star game, and you could see the true 30, 40 guys and some of the sleepers. I remember one year you coached Marshall Falk. I remember that on that staff. But what was those memories like for you?
Unbelievable. Just and of course, at the moment, you don't realize how big they were and how important they were. It's what I call the purity of the game. I really believe in the 70s and the 80s, we were still in the purity of the game. Players played for the right reasons. Coaches coached for the right reason. Money was not a factor any longer. Coaches, the difference between the head coach's salary and the assistant's salary was marginal. And so there was a commitment and a loyalty. And I think the same thing was true. Those all-star teams were just unbelievably rewarding. I can't go very many places today where somebody doesn't walk up to me and say, I played for you in 1985. I played for you in 1979. I played for you, whatever. I was at our baseball playoff last year, and the umpire at third base walked up to me and he said, I know you don't remember me. And I didn't. He said, but I played an all-star game at Tiger Stadium. It was one of the greatest memories of my life. And when recruiting got so out of whack is when all that began to dwindle, because as you said, early enrollment became a problem. Coaches wanting players on their campus the first part of June, all that kind of dwindled the value or the importance of the high school all-star game. But listen, I've coached some great players in there. We talked about Nacho Abagamo. We talked about...
I was going to ask you Eric Andelsek.
Eric Andelsek.
You said he was one of the greatest you've ever coached.
Yeah, he's the best offensive lineman I ever coached. Now, I know I've had Kevin,
right,
Mawai, those guys were... But Eric was a physical specimen that was beyond understanding. When Jerry got fired, Bill kept Pete Jenkins on. And there was only three guys, maybe 2 or 3 guys. Mm-hmm. He and...
was it Blue, Coach Blue?
Yeah, and just retired. Was there...
Mac Brown?
It'll come to me. No. It'll come to me.
Jerry Sullivan? No.
No,
not Jerry.
The associate did recruiting, did all the...
Sam Nader.
Dr.
Nader.
Look, that's what age does to you.
No, Coach, you got it. You good?
I think it was just a couple of guys, and Pete called me, and he said, now listen, didn't you scrimmage Thibodeau? And I said, yeah, we did. He said, well, what about this Andelsek kid? I got his name.
Yeah.
And I said, boy, Pete, he is a really good player, but man, I don't think he can get any bigger. I said, he's about 240, 245, but you could strike a match on him. Well, that's my evaluation of a great player, because he played at 305 pounds, and you could still strike a match on him.
Right.
He was the physically the most gifted player in terms of offensive or defensive lineman that I've ever run across, and his life to end tragically like it did was obviously disappointment to a lot of people and greatly missed. But that was just we had some great players in that day, and they all bought into the value of the high school all-star game.
And then we get through the 90s. You got Tommy Bowden at Tulane. You got DiNardo and Hallman at LSU. We get through the 90s, and we got all these sports agents now that are now coaches' agents. And then we have more movement with college coaches in the 2000s. A lot has changed since the 90s, Coach, with coaches not staying, having big agents, some having the same agent. And then you became friends along the way. Then Nick Saban came in the early 2000s at LSU. Toledo, I remember, was at Tulane during that era after Bowden. Thoughts about, I know Saban, we and you talked about him, how he was had things laid out, very detailed coach. And talk about how you helped him with Burton Burns to go with him to Alabama, which he didn't go to him to LSU at first when he was at LSU, but both Burton and your friend Pete Jenkins.
Yeah. Well, when Nick got the job at LSU the first time, my relationship went back with him to Michigan State when he recruited from Michigan State here, and so we were on the sideline at practice, maybe the second or third day after he had the job, and he said, "Man, I need to get somebody who's got some LSU ties," and immediately Pete Jenkins popped into my head, and I said, "Coach," I said, not only will you have a guy that will give you instant credibility with the LSU people because of the way he was able to recruit, and I'm telling you now, he and Coach Stovall were a pair together. They just they could get in the middle of it and were relentless. I said, but you're going to get a great football coach, and it turned out to be that way. Coach Jenkins and Coach Saban still to this day have a relationship. And Coach Jenkins continued to, long after he had left LSU and Alabama, going in to help their defensive staff and to confer with them on some defensive technique, which he is the best in the world at. So, Burton was a guy that I talked with him about when he was at LSU the first time, and Burton turned him down. Burton decided to stay where he was, and when the Alabama job opened up and we talked again, and I mentioned Burton's name, the first thing he said to me was, "We turned me down the last time you recommended me." So I said, "Well, I think, Coach," and of course, Burton was at Clemson at that time, and I think he wanted to get back a little closer to home. And by the way, still in Tuscaloosa. Yeah, I visited with him at the St. Aug game.
Okay.
He and his brother. Well, what a great family the Burnses were. They're just a solid New Orleans family that have great commitment here. But that's the way Coach was. Coach is such a loyalist and a guy that recognizes coaches that are committed and stays with them. And those two guys were big influences in Coach's life.
JT, Coach, what's crazy is that you look at Burton Burns recruiting running backs at Alabama. He was 5 for 5 getting Derrick Henry, Mark Ingram, Richardson out of Pensacola, Scambia. He got the player of the year in the country, 5 running backs. Eddie Lacy.
Yep.
I mean, he hit on some really good running backs.
He was a great recruiter.
Yeah.
Burton,
Yeah.
But not only was he a recruiter, when he got him, he coached him hard. And I'm telling you now, Burton, he coached him hard. But guys like you mentioned, the Ingrams of the world, the Lacey's of the world, the Henrys of the world, those guys bought into that.
Najee Harris.
They bought into the physicality that Burton brought to the table. And they adapted his personality into their play, whether they wanted to or not initially.
Right.
But look at the payoff. I mean, you're talking about backs that not only are still making impact in the National Football League today, if you watch that game this weekend with Henry, but he was just a fundamentalist and again, a purist at heart. His interest was the player as a person, not the player as just an athlete. And I think that showed in how those guys still respect and love him.
Thanks for watching the Sports Scouting Report with Lieber King.